Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. It is 4:01 on Thursday, April the 30th. And I'm Laura Dixon with Spurs Sports and Entertainment. This year, I serve as the president of the Texas Lyceum, and I want to thank you for joining us in this conversation among leaders of Texas for leaders of Texas. And we have a great panel lined up to discuss the economic recovery, and it's moderated by Roberto Coronado. I want to also ask that you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, find that little Q&A box where you can submit questions that we will get to our moderator. And also, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their support and being just as agile as we've had to be to make all things work for the Lyceum this year. We also will have a director nomination open. Actually, they have opened up, and you can find that information on texaslyceum.org. Roberto, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to learning from you guys today.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Texas Lyceum Virtual Forum on the Economic Recovery. My name is Roberto Coronado, and I'm a Senior Vice President and Senior Economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas in El Paso, but I'm also a proud director of the Texas Lyceum Class of 2019. It is a true honor and pleasure to be today's moderator, and in a moment we'll get in a very rich conversation with our panelists, and I'll introduce them in a second, but I thought I will start by setting the stage for our conversation today. I think all of us over the past several weeks, we have seen, in some cases, lived firsthand, the staggering consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. And they're becoming more and more increasingly evident in our state, in our nation, and across the globe. The pandemic has forced us to change, and hopefully only temporarily, the way we live, the way we work. This extraordinary situation is testing our capacity, quite frankly, to respond, testing our capacity to find solutions, and then testing our capacity to come together as one. There's no doubt that the pandemic has brought it with it several and severe shocks to our society, but also to our economy and to our financial markets. When we think about the global and when we think about the national economy, we have witnessed wide-scale suspensions in the production of goods, disruptions in regional and global supply chains, a steep drop in consumption, and unemployment claims that are all-time high in our history. For Texas, unfortunately, the story is not too different. As I mentioned, I worked at the Dallas Fed, and at the bank, we have a terrific team of economists who track the regional economy. And then we also have a team of outreach professionals who try to get the real-time pulse of what's going on in Main Street. Whether we looked at the hard data or at the economic analysis, or whether we looked at the anecdotal or on-the-ground information, I think we arrive at the same conclusion, is that for Texas, the pandemic has slowed down substantially our economy and is likely to continue to impact and have a significant challenges for our state in the weeks and possibly months ahead. The measures that we all have implemented when it comes to social distancing, closing essential businesses, are critical to slow down the spread of the pandemic, but are quite frankly choking our economy into a historic standstill. As we continue to grapple with the unknowns of the virus, I think our economic reemergence may not be quick and may not be straightforward. And I think, minimizing the loss of life, minimizing the spread of COVID continues to be our top priority. But I think it's now important for us to start strategically to think about and convene groups to start discussing how to prepare our economy, how to prepare our workforce to rebound from this devastating shock. So we hope that today's forum offers the opportunity to leverage the phenomenal expertise and the phenomenal thought leadership we have within the Texas Lyceum to seek constructive solutions to the challenges we're facing. All of you received the bios of our panelists, for which we're very grateful for their time and their expertise. Let me just say a brief, some brief remarks on each of them, and then I'll get started with the Q&A session. I'll start with James Huffines. James is with JRH Partners and currently serves as the chairman for the Southwestern Medical Foundation. But more importantly, in recent weeks, James has been tapped by Governor Abbott to lead the governor's strike force to open Texas. He has an extensive career in banking and finance, over 35 years of experience there. And he has served on numerous boards across our state, to include the UT Board of Regents, where he actually served as chair twice. And then also James is a director, or was a director of the Lyceum of class of 1983. Dale Craymer, he is the president of Texas Taxpayers and Research Association. This is a non-for-profit organization of businesses and individuals interested in fiscal and other public policy issues. Dale is considered one of the most prominent experts in the Texas economy, tax policy, and the Texas budget. And he was a director of the Lyceum in class of 1999. Then we also have Linda McMahon. She serves as the president and CEO of the Real Estate Council. The council is the largest and without a doubt most influential commercial real estate organization in our state. It comprises over 2,200 members and about 650 member companies. The council focuses on policy, public policy issues, leadership development, and community investment through their foundation and their community fund. She also has about over 3 decades of experience in banking, but she is very passionate also about building communities, and I'm sure we're gonna get to that during our conversation today. She was a director of the Lyceum in class of 1995. Last but certainly not least, my dear friend Alex Meade. Alex is the Senior Vice President of Economic Development and Public Finance at Texas Regional Bank. In that capacity, he's responsible for the bank's public policy strategy, and he leads the efforts to identify and develop economic opportunities and education initiatives in the markets in which his bank operates. He also has a deep experience when it comes to public policy and economic development. He served as the city manager of FAR, Texas, as well as the head of economic development of Mission, Texas, both communities along the Rio Grande Valley, so clearly a border expert and thought leader there. And Alex was a director of the Texas Lyceum, class of 2014. So having said that, the game plan for today is I'll spend the first 35 minutes posing questions to the panelists. After that, we will open the Q&A to the audience. So I'll ask you to start formulating your questions, and we'll do our very best to go through all of them. You can do that sending them via email to me or through this Zoom chat box. And well, like I said, we'll do our best to get to them. So without further ado, again, I would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And let's get started. Let me start with James. And for full disclosure, James has a very tight schedule, as you can imagine, and he's gonna be with us for the next 20-25 minutes, and then he'll have to move on to his next meeting. But thank you for being here. So James, as the chair of the governor's strike force to open Texas, can you share with us a little bit more about some insights into the latest developments on the economic recovery plan, please?
Sure. Thank you, Roberto. First of all, can you hear me okay? I think, oh, good. I just want to compliment all of the Lyceum members and your leadership. I had the privilege to be part of the Lyceum at its early beginnings, and it made a big impression on my career. And so I compliment you and encourage you, and actually challenge all the members to continue to be active and participate. I think you'll look back in 10 or 20 years and realize it was a very gratifying experience. Okay, let me just hit the highlights of the structure of the governor's strike force. Some of you might have read about it. Certainly the governor had another press conference Monday of this week. 2 weeks ago, he appointed 38 members from around the state, all the communities and industries pretty much represented, to begin preparing a plan of feedback so that he could make recommendations and executive orders to the state. And let me just point out one key issue. There are lots of task forces out there right now, mayors, county judges, et cetera, around the state. But only the governor's executive orders has the actual power of law to standardize safety protocols, metrics that will go across the entire state. So that's what he is focused on, is really beginning to reopen Texas in a very safe, gradual, and methodical manner. And over the last 2 weeks, the strike force and the full-time staff have put together an initial phase 1 game plan, which the report and the book can be found on the website. I can give you that website address if you desire, but it's a 65-page, very detailed guidelines for many of the specific industries that have begun to reopen. And we know, the governor knows from the very beginning, there would be some that thought he didn't go far enough, and there would be some that thought he might have gone too far. And the key thing on the task force, every decision, every recommendation that the governor makes is vetted by his medical expert team. He has 4 medical experts, the top disease infectious epidemiologist from Dell Medical in Austin, Dr. Mark McClellan, former FDA commissioner for President Bush. He's currently at Duke University. He's working actually with 10 other states on the same type of programs. Dr. Hellerstadt and Dr. John Zerwas. These doctors, twice a day for an hour a day at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. go over all of the input, the feedback, the suggestions, and the recommendations. And I might add, we're not shortage of recommendations or ideas. There's been an abundance of participation. So that, in a nutshell, Roberto, is the structure of the governor's strike force.
Thank you, James. That's very helpful, to get behind the scenes as to what's going on and how do you get organized and what sort of input is being channeled through you and up to the governor. Can you help us, how do you think about the recovery, and how do you think, the sequencing? You mentioned something has to be safe and gradual. And so how do you think about the recovery? How do you prioritize who goes first, who goes second? And then you also talked about the medical portion of it and how the medical profession is part of these conversations. Can you tell us how do you make those trade-offs and those decisions, which are, I would imagine, pretty challenging?
Yeah, very well said. They are challenging. 3 things the governor really did on Monday was to start allowing certain businesses to reopen at partial capacity. But along with that, he talked about the importance and the essential requirement of more testing and tracing. And let me explain what tracing is real fast. Tracing is where, when someone is tested positive, we go back and look at who they've been in contact with. We are hiring 1,000 tracers right now. There are 1,200 people employed tracing, and we hope to have that to 4,000 individuals within the next 2 or 3 weeks that will just track down other people that have been exposed. Second, we were going to isolate the vulnerable population. 85% of the fatalities in Texas have come from people that are over 60 years old and that have other underlying health conditions. So we are ramping up testing in the retirement communities, the homeless shelters, the jails, etc., wherever there's cluster housing. So on the economic recovery, we have to get the state back. The governor knows that Texas has to get the economy back on track. And but it's going to be a gradual process depending on the data, the hard data, and the doctors. And let me just talk about how the medical experts play a role in these decisions. They are presented with various multiple options of input that we get from industries, associations, task force members, etc. And they're debated. And I will say not all the medical experts agree, but unless they all agree that a protocol that we're suggesting is safe and will not compound the virus spread, we don't go forward with it. And I know there were a lot of people concerned that we didn't open up, hypothetically, hair salons. Well, we just weren't ready, according to the data. Now, on the economic recovery, Roberto, the governor's already thinking about how we can leverage some of our federal dollars coming into the state of Texas, how we might be able to leverage or allocate that to economic recovery. I will say unquestionably, Governor Abbott wants to lead the country in economic recruitment and recovery. And we think Texas is well positioned to do that. We think there's going to be a massive relocation of the supply chain over the supply chains over the next 3 to 5 years. We think Texas is a logical location for many of those. We also think there's going to be an exodus out of the East Coast and other states that have had more problems with COVID. Right now, Texas is number 2 in population, but we rank 41st in fatalities per capita on population. And that says a lot about our state, I think. Does that answer your question?
Does that answer my question, James? Thank you so much. And maybe if I can have a quick follow-up. So when you think about the strategy to open Texas, and you mentioned how gradual this would be, what's sort of your runway that you think about and you looked into? I mean, are we talking about, you're thinking about the next few weeks, the next few months? What's that runway?
Well, we're trying to do both. With the workload and the input, we're thinking really a day at a time. But
I agree.
Let me comment one other thing. In Texas, there are 171 counties out of the 254 that have never had a fatality. And there are probably 100 counties right now in Texas that have less than 3 or 4 active cases, period. So the governor did announce a system that if a county could certify that they had less than 5 active cases, and they had protocols in place, they could go to 50% opening instead of the 25% opening that he laid out for the urban counties. So you have to understand the state's a wide, diverse state. Many of your members are from different parts of the state. And I'm sure all of you would have different viewpoints on how much to open up the economy at this time. But any time a county reaches 5 or less active cases, they can expand their retail restaurants to 50% of capacity instead of 25. He will look at this on a weekly basis. We expect to have another press conference in a couple of weeks to, again, evaluate the data and possibly open up more businesses and expand the percentages. Now, we're also looking a few months down the road at the same time is how Texas can be opportunistic to take advantage of our situation today of where we are to get a jump on the other states on economic recovery and business recruitment.
Very good. Thanks a lot, James. Do I have any follow-ups or a few questions or thoughts from the other panelists before we move into Dale? We'll take advantage of James's time. Well, James, it's been a pleasure having you on board. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for helping Texas open up for business. And you are welcome to join us for as long as your schedule allows. But if you don't mind, let me move to
Sure.
Dale now.
Absolutely.
So Dale, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for joining us as well. We thought that it would be appropriate if you can, begin by telling us what's the current state of the Texas economy.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Since mid-March, we've seen about 1.5 million Texans file for unemployment. That means we've lost roughly 1 of every 8 jobs in just the past 6 weeks. Now, the good news overall, though, is that filings are dropping a bit from the previous week. So hopefully we're reaching a point of stability. We usually represent about 3 to 4% of the nation's unemployment filings. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been running at about twice that, which reflects the fact that Texas has basically been hit with a double whammy. Not only do we have the losses from the COVID-related shutdowns, but we've also seen a collapse in oil prices. And though we like to think of Texas as a modern, diverse economy, the reality is that we're still about 5 times more reliant on oil and gas than the rest of the nation as a whole. Not surprisingly, Houston is the hardest hit of our major metro areas, Dallas the least. but in truth, there's not really a big spread between those numbers. Most of the COVID-related layoffs have been in general retail, restaurants, and travel, but that's starting to change the longer our slide. We're starting to see more white-collar layoffs in finance and business support services, and even some government jobs. So putting the numbers together, and most of those are very rough and preliminary at this point, but it appears that even though the virus has not been as humanly devastating in Texas, as James mentioned, as it has been in other states, the economic losses here have been somewhat higher when you factor in the oil and gas implications as well. Now, obviously, as the economy begins to reopen, absent a major uptick in cases and whatever public response that may entail, nationally, we're probably looking at a 1 to 3 year recovery before we revisit our past economic peak. Travel and hospitality are likely to lag, which in Texas may take a bigger toll on Austin and San Antonio. Overall, Texas may be a bit slower to return to peak if oil prices stay weak for the foreseeable future. But I do want to emphasize something that James mentioned, in that while there are great challenges ahead for us, there's also great opportunity, because companies have been more concerned about their supply chain issues arising from heavy reliance on foreign producers. Texas is a great location for industrial facilities. So if we do see a substantial amount of new manufacturing investment in this country, Texas is probably going to be in a great position to rein in a bigger share of that than other states are.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I was going to say, Dale, as a follow-up, and going back to James' comment too, that as we were thinking about the USMCA and how strategically Texas would be positioned to take a more significant approach when it comes to North American economy from a manufacturing perspective, what you're saying, if I heard you, both of you correctly, is that the pandemic is likely to accelerate some of those plans going forward. Is that what I heard you saying?
I think for some industries it will. Obviously, a big question is going to be access to capital. Although interest rates are very, very favorable right now for longer term investment, the challenge is going to be getting companies comfortable enough to go ahead and sink those dollars in the ground. And James, you quite honestly probably have a better perspective on that.
I agree with you. I do think it will be a challenge. I'll just add this. We are exploring right now ways to try to get more capital to small business in Texas, and also leverage some of the federal dollars that will be coming down in the next month. We're talking billions of dollars that we're exploring to see if we can use any of that to change our infrastructure to help put us in an opportunistic position. So we're looking under every rock to be opportunistic.
Thank you, James. And Dale, you're a subject matter expert on budgets, public finance, and clearly what we've seen in the last few weeks, it's to some extent for some communities and for the state in general, is kind of the perfect storm, in the sense that outlays are growing and growing dramatically to, again, face the impact of COVID, but then the revenue and the collection of local or state is probably going to be contracting substantially because of this lower economic activity. So what are your thoughts as far as from a state perspective and from a local perspective? We're beginning to hear from communities who are talking about at the city level, county level, furloughs, layoffs. What are your projections for the state's budget and for local public finances?
Yeah, well, and it's important to remember that state and local governments are a very critical part of our overall economy. It represents about 12% of our national output. So it is an important player in the economy as well as the services it provides. But there's one thing different about government is for state and local governments, it's basically a zero-sum game. Whatever they spend, they have to take in. State and local governments have balanced budget requirements. Washington does not. So as we look at what we're seeing on the horizon, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the state. Sales taxes in particular are suffering under the shutdowns. We think of the general sales tax as a retail tax, but in fact, retail stores probably account for about a third of tax collections. You know, restaurants, hotels are also very big contributors to the sales tax. So Texas state government gets about 2/3 of its revenue from the sales tax. That's going to probably see a steep decline. When Comptroller Hager certified the budget last summer, he estimated at the time Texas state government had about a 2 to 3% surplus, roughly $3 billion. He said that he's going to reevaluate those numbers probably in July after he gets the first couple of months of economic data that reflects the impact of the shutdown. And at that point, I expect he'll tell us we'll be several $billion in the red. State agencies are working on revised budget plans, but we're not going to be able to cut our way out of a deficit. So fortunately, we have about $8.5 billion in the rainy day fund. We can use that. So state government is probably in a good position to weather the storm that we're in. It's not going to be easy. There will be some challenges. Obviously, the longer this drags on, the harder it's going to be. Within the other framework of governments, I think cities are likely to be under a substantial amount of strain. The sales tax is an important revenue source for them. They're going to see declining receipts. That's going to come at the same time that they're getting additional demands for services. If you look at schools and counties are probably going to be in better shape. They rely much more heavily on the property tax. And property tax is a much more stable source of revenue. However, the good news for the schools and the counties that they have access to a stable source of revenue is probably bad news for property owners, because at the same time, we're starting to experience the impacts on our family budgets relating to the shutdowns. The property tax is going to be very, very sticky. The only way to provide property tax relief is to raise less property taxes, and cities and counties are not likely to cut their tax bills coming up. So it's going to be a challenge for pretty much any unit of government as we look ahead, but I'd probably put the state and cities facing the steepest hill to climb.
Yeah. Thank you, Dale. And I'll go back to Alex in just a second and get his perspective, because he has city management perspective. But James, one question that came in, and I know we have probably about 90 seconds with you. It's about school openings and what's in the in your task force as far as when will schools be open and what sort of conversations are you having there?
We're having a lot of conversations. And including the universities. We have to have a standard plan for the host state. Some of the universities today announced they were going to open in the fall. But I do think we're looking at the schools on a weekly basis. Obviously, the governor announced they're going to be closed through the end of May. But hopefully, we set an internal deadline of June, mid-June to late June to make a final decision for the fall. But we're very hopeful if the data continues to improve that we'll be open the schools. We're looking at daycare. We're looking at summer camps, day camps, sports camps. We're looking at all of that.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Alex, if I can go back and resume our conversation on public finance, you have quite a bit of experience at a city level. So what's your take regarding the public finance of cities in the state of Texas?
You know, in June, when the sales tax report comes out, that's when we're really going to see what the impact is to the communities. And it is kind of an uneasy feeling knowing that, those businesses have been closed. We haven't been collecting sales tax. And so the impact to the city's budget is going to be significant. You know, if it's not for property taxes, it's for sales taxes, as Dale was mentioning. Those are the two largest revenue sources of revenue for the communities. And so we heavily rely on that, yet we're having all these additional expenses that we're having to take on to prepare the community for COVID, you know, those things that we were going to use money for in our budget are now having to be spent on these emergency management planning that we have to do. So it is scary. I know that in certain communities are starting to let go of employees in preparation for the low sales tax that they're going to have here in the summer months. So it is kind of an easy feeling, as I mentioned, to see what's going to happen.
Thank you, Alex. So Linda, if I may go to you, and as a real estate expert on the panel today, you know, coming or prior to COVID-19, I would argue that the real estate market in Texas overall, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, was a pretty tight market in general. What has happened in the real estate market post-COVID, and what sort of changes has the sector and the industry adopt to weather the storm in a better way?
Thank you, Roberto. I will start with where you started your question, and that is commercial real estate contributed over $54 billion to the state's economy last year. And it was a significant driver with over almost 380,000 employees employed throughout the state. So it had a significant impact on the state from an economic perspective. Obviously, with all of the things that are occurring right now, all the different sectors of commercial real estate are having different challenges. Hotel hospitality basically it's an ugly story. 50% of all hotels across the country are closed. I know you all know in your communities, the hotels that have been closed down, Omni Barton Creek, newly renovated, is closed down until the end of May. I've heard lots of stories about hotel closures as well as furloughs for employees, et cetera. And that's going to take some time to recover. Retail is also another ugly story. 1 in 4 people across the country are employed by retail establishments, and the impact to the retail businesses is estimated to be around $6 trillion. So the impact from retail perspective is really, really interesting, and probably the most challenging part of the commercial real estate sector. Now we have retail to go in Dallas, and of course tomorrow we're opening up the other retail establishments, and everyone's working on protocols, but technology is going to be key to both of those types of businesses: restaurants, retail, hotel, hospitality. Things like thermal imaging, things like touchless technology are all going to play a part in how we move forward, even past COVID and living with COVID, frankly. In the office sector, it's actually rents were paid at 80% across the country, so not suffering as badly as retail and hospitality. Multifamily is holding tight. People are still leasing apartments. In the office sector, they're now figuring out how to do virtual tours. One real estate leader told me that they did a virtual tour of 100,000 square feet in Georgia last week, and it turned out to be very successful. Leases are still being signed, but there is requests for lease relief, rent relief in the office sector. In the retail sector, every landlord is trying to figure out how to keep their tenants in place. There is renegotiations on every single piece of retail. And so they're all trying to figure out how they can keep their establishments there. I can tell you lots of stories about how landlords have been helping restaurants and retail apply for their PPP loans, how they've done everything they can to keep people in business because it's a lot more expensive to replace a tenant. And frankly, the banking system can't manage the asset management side of foreclosures. And so everyone is taking a pause and being very, very patient in that area. Multifamily was super tight before all of this happened. Occupancies were at 97% roughly, and that contributed to the affordable or attainable housing issue that we have in the state, which is a national problem, and that will continue. But that is to be, evening out. People still have to have a place to live, but the people that are hardest hit are the lower income people, and those are the ones that are going to have a tough time finding a place to live. On the industrial sector, the belle of the ball, the last mile of industrial, all of the things we talked about earlier are super big in Texas. The warehouse logistics, all of that business is really, really strong. People are signing new leases, building new warehouses, and they anticipate that to be the one piece of the real estate sector that's really going to drag things through. So we're super excited about how that sector is going to be performing, because we're all on Amazon. We're all ordering things and having things delivered to our door. I know the UPS driver personally in my building, which is commentary, but that's where we are from the economic side. On the operations side, everyone now is trying to figure out how we're going to operate with COVID, how we're going to be able to make our work places safe. Cushman & Wakefield, I think, has produced some really great information from their experiences in Asia. And they have, actually, there was an article in Fast Company this month that kind of outlines some of their design solutions to making sure people have plenty of space. It's an interesting component. The private office had gone away. Hoteling was the new thing in commercial real estate and office. WeWork was the new thing. Now everyone's thinking about those private offices look really good. And one of our developers anecdotally told us that they were working on a build to suit, and the tenant asked them to design more space, because they knew they were going to need more space for tenants to be able to, for the people that work in the office to be comfortable. But there is a lot of conversations around how we're going to lead in terms of design, technology, and how offices are going to be functioning in the future, how we're going to be going back to work in shifts, et cetera. So there's tons of things that are impacting what's going to actually happen when we return to multi-tenant office buildings. I will note that the governor's guidance does not mention anything about multi-tenant office buildings. And that's something that we're going to have to work through, how that's going to be resolved and managed.
Yeah, certainly, I guess going forward, the way we work and the way we interact at the workplace is going to change dramatically. And of course, that's going to have an impact to your sector for sure.
Right.
And so it's going to be very interesting to see how we make that evolution, and how does the sector, how does your industry respond to it. But thank you, Linda, for your insights. Let me go to Alex here and maybe ask Alex. So from a community bank perspective, I think we've heard story after story that the community banks have been the lifeline of many small businesses across our state and across the nation. And this is, especially in light of all the federal programs that have been put in place to try to bring support and assistance to small businesses. From your perspective, what are the most pressing issues small businesses are facing today? And are you seeing some sign of relief now, or we're still not there yet?
Roberto, thank you for that question. So first, let me say that community banks, some banks think they're community banks, right? They think they all claim to be there for the community, but it's times like this that really puts them to the test. In fact, this morning I got a call from the SBA. They had a lady that owns a daycare. The bank that she was working with, was trying to help her. She submitted her application for the SBA PPP program, and they kind of went silent on her. So they called me. They said, "Hey, would you be willing to take care of the customer?" I said, "Look, the lady's desperate. I'm not going to steal business in times like this. Let me call the bank, see if I can help." I called the bank, and they said, "Yeah, we just stopped doing the PPP program." And so it's a local bank. They just stopped. They just decided they're not going to do it anymore. So that's why I say it's times like this that really puts a test to these banks, because here's a lady that needs help, right? She's an employer here in the region, but the bank says there's too many guidelines, there's too many changing targets. We're just going to stop doing it, but forgot to tell their customer. And so the lady is there hoping to get a call. So, fortunately we took care of her. But so it's times like this that really puts the banks to the test. But I can tell you that obviously the biggest issue that we've been seeing is that the businesses are having to operate, at a reduced amount of, staff or what have you. And so of course that's affecting all business. And it's also, I think it's nice to see that before the PPP program, the banks were already working with their businesses, as Linda mentioned, in real estate, retail, right? You have all these shopping centers that have these tenants, and a lot of the real estate developers that I was working with, they are saying, look, don't pay me rent, use that to keep your business afloat, because I need you to stay as a tenant when this is over. Otherwise, I'm stuck with a 5-year lease where I'm not collecting rent, or a 10-year lease. So I'd rather help you for a few months and know that you're my tenant versus losing you as a whole. And so it's neat that the community and the banks were getting creative to come up with solutions. But now that we have a solution in place, or a temporary solution, which is the PPP program, the businesses are having to deal with the fact that employees make more money through the unemployment than they do sticking in their job, right? And so the issue now is, I've got folks that are saying, look, I applied for the PPP, I got funded, but now I don't know if I should take the money, because I'm losing my employees are making more money unemployed than they are working for me. So now the employer or the business is stuck with, one, having to find new employees and then having to train them, or shutting down. And so that's the kind of interesting thing that we're starting to see, is that now businesses are saying, look, I don't know if I should take that money, or I'll take it and I'll repay right away just so I can get rid of that debt. So that's interesting to see. But I'll tell you, the cool thing I'm seeing, as you mentioned, with my public background, I'm really working. My job is to work with communities, help them grow. If I can help them grow, then by default we hope the bank will grow. And so as I'm working with these communities, the communities are having to also come up with solutions. Because if the business is going under, then as Dale mentioned, it affects their sales tax, right? And the property tax. And it behooves the city to come up with a solution as well. And so some cities that I'm working with are coming up with their own revolving loan funds. And they're saying, look, we're going to give you a small loan in case you didn't qualify for PPP, or as we found out in the first round, the PPP money ran out in about 3.5 days, 4 days. And so they came up with their own solution by coming up with a revolving loan fund that allows small businesses to apply, mainly in the retail sector, so they can continue collecting that retail tax, because they need that sales tax. And as you all know, the 8.25% sales tax collected, 6.25 goes to the state, 2% goes to the city. So it's a huge impact to the city when they don't collect that tax. So I thought it was kind of neat to see the community pulling together, whether it was the banks, whether it was the cities or the counties, to find a solution to keep these businesses in place, because in the end, it does affect everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And I guess, you and I are both border residents. And so it's not only what happens in our nation or our state that matters to communities like the Rio Grande Valley or El Paso, but also what happens across the border in Mexico. What are you seeing across the border? How are border communities? Is there something unique happening to border communities vis-a-vis the rest of the state? Or what's your take on what's going on with the Texas border communities?
30 to 40% of the economy in the valley is made up from the Mexican shopper, right? They come across to eat, shop, study, what have you. And so when our non-essential businesses are shut down, then they're not crossing, right? Which affects also the economy, as opposed to just the local shopper. Now we have the international shopper that's also being affected. Not to mention, as it was mentioned earlier, the global supply chain. You have all these maquiladoras on the Mexican side of the border. They're U.S. companies on the Mexican side, but they have to stop their operations. So now you have the employees from the U.S. side are not going over there to work on the Mexican side. But not to mention, most of these manufacturing companies operate on just-in-time manufacturing, right? They produce it as it's being utilized on the manufacturing or on the final product. And so you kind of stop that. And so that just-in-time manufacturing is also affected tremendously. I do think that we are going to start seeing a bunch of, reshoring, more companies coming back to the U.S. I think our proximity to the border makes us a prime location for that. And I think we will get companies. We were already seeing that when, a couple of years ago, when they were talking about the border adjustment tax, we were already starting to see companies come back. And so I think we're going to continue to see those opportunities.
Thank you, Alex. Well, I appreciate your insights. Let me now, we've tackled a few of the audience questions, but let me now shift gears here and go to the audience. And I think there's a question for you, Linda, with respect to the commercial real estate. as I guess going forward, as more people will become comfortable working from home, how is that going to impact your industry, and what are you doing in anticipation of that? And they are citing here, large accounting firms, large law firms, allowing their employees in the workforce to work from home, and therefore less demand for your industry. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that is a very interesting conversation. Coincidentally, I had this conversation with several commercial real estate developers last week. Thankfully, the technology infrastructure has held up for us to be able to do these types of meetings and calls. We're doing a lot of virtual meetings, but the reality is that you can't really build a corporate culture or a company culture if you're not having an opportunity to get to know each other in a personal way in the office. So a lot of businesses' brand identity is based on their culture, and that has become extremely important in business over the last many years. And so while it is easier to work from home for a lot of different businesses, what you'll lose if you do that, if that is the way that your organization decides to move forward, you'll lose the opportunity to build a brand identity. You'll lose the opportunity to build loyalty with your people. Talent retention is extremely important for the economy, but if people don't feel connected to the relationships they have within their office or within their company, why would they stay? They're all independent contractors. So I think it's a philosophical response, but I do think it has a lot of validity, because that corporate culture is really what makes every company different. And without that, you don't really have any business that has any soul.
Okay, thank you. And I think there's a number of questions coming in for all of you in two veins that are kind of related. Restrictions are going to be lifted starting tomorrow, and then gradually, as James alluded to, are going to be lifted going forward. The first set of questions is, what do you expect, and what should we expect on the retail, on the restaurants starting tomorrow? What are your contacts telling you?
Well, I have quite a few members that I talk to frequently that own restaurants. One in particular has 2,200 employees, and he owns a chain of restaurants. His word to me was, if I have to only be occupied at 50%, I'm not opening. I'm getting enough business from takeout that is going to be at 70% of sales. And if I open at 50%, I have to still pay my people 100%. And so, you have 100% staff. So the cost benefit analysis just doesn't work, particularly. So one of the things that they have said in response to that is restaurants are going to become smaller, and they're probably going to be operating a lot differently. One of the big challenges, particularly in Dallas and probably in other cities, zoning requirements are the same if you have people sitting outside as if you have a large footprint inside. So if you have a patio and people feel more comfortable sitting outside and having happy hour or having dinner, you still have to park the same number of cars. So that's one of the reliefs we are asking. We're proposing to municipalities. They need to be looking at these zoning regulations that will impact how offices, how restaurants, how businesses operate given the change in environment. But the restaurant situation is pretty dire. And it just doesn't make any sense for people to open up with only 25%. But I did get an email yesterday from my favorite Mexican restaurant, and they said they were opening tomorrow. So reservation only, I'll be in line. That's what we've heard.
Sounds good, Linda. Hopefully you'll be observing social distancing there too.
Of course.
Yeah,
And
Roberto, I'll jump in on that too. I think as you look at human behavior, and as an economist, I'm supposed to know something about that, but don't know that I can say much more than anyone else. But I've seen some interesting surveys lately about how willing people are going to be to re-engage in the economy. And it looks like you've probably got about a third. Regardless of capacity constraints, when you open the doors, a third of the folks are going to be comfortable enough, or they never believed in the severity of the coronavirus in the first place, and they're going to show up. But as Linda pointed out, businesses can't survive on a third of their previous business. The challenge is going to be getting that next third in that are indicating they're going to be much more cautious over the next 1 to 3 months as to their behavior. They're going to want to see that it's safe, that we're not having a second recurrence, and then they'll re-engage. And then there's probably another third that's going to be very, very difficult to get back into the traditional flow of activity. And they will probably be a much tougher sell. So I think we're likely, there's been a lot of talk, are we going to have a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, or an L-shaped recovery? I think probably somewhere between an L and a U.
I heard a W.
I'm sorry, Linda?
I heard a W recovery.
Who knows? Who knows? But I think getting that last swatch of folks that we need to re-engage to get back to 100%, they're going to be more doubting Thomases. They're going to want to see a lot more evidence and take a lot longer time to fully re-engage.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. And that was the second tranche of questions around, it's one thing to lift the restrictions, but it's a very different thing to change the behavior and the perception and the expectations of the consumer to re-engage in such those type of economic activities. But Alex, you wanted to chime in and.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing. I think in general, I think people are going to say that they don't feel comfortable, right? Just so you're going to have that 1/3 that does. But if you look outside my window right now, it seems like it's like today's Friday when it's not. There's more cars out on the road than there was, last week, and so I think people are I think globally, they may feel not ready, but I think locally, when you look at the community as a whole, you're going to start seeing more people come out. Whether is going to be enough to sustain a business, I don't know. That I think when you get to that level, that's when people are going to have to take some precautions, and I think it's going to behoove the business owner to also make that customer feel comfortable in that new environment. But I do know that a lot of things are going to change. I used to manage a co-working facility. Co-working, as Linda mentioned, with WeWork. Those things are going to change. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this gig economy that's used to just going to Starbucks and working is not going to be able to do that so much anymore.
Yeah. That's a great point, because locally we may see folks willing to re-engage, but in San Antonio and in Austin, if all you have is the locals re-engaging, that's probably not enough to support the overall economy. You've got to have those tourists coming in, folks willing to hop on a plane and make San Antonio and Austin their destination. I mean, that's the reason historically it's always been hard to get a reservation in Austin on a Friday night. It's not the Austinites that are crowding us out, it's the tourists.
Yeah. Thank you. And this question might be for Linda or Alex, and it revolves around residential housing, whether it's to buy a new home or for leases. Right now, we have historical, low rates of interest, but at the same time, folks are facing significant challenges from a financial perspective, whether job losses, loss of income stream. So what are your prospects in the next 2 or 3 months when it comes to the housing market? And how should we think about that?
So I'll offer 2 comments and I'll turn it over to Alex. One, and Alex, this may not be relevant for regional banks or more local banks, but the national banks have stopped taking mortgage applications. They're not processing mortgage applications, as we've heard. But construction, thank goodness, is continuing, and that means single family construction. And so the good news, I think the bright spot on how we will recover is that construction has continued. It's proven to be safe, and housing is being built, and commercial real estate is being built. So that will help, but Dallas actually stopped issuing permits a few weeks ago, so you couldn't even start a house if you wanted to. I understand they're going to start opening that back up again, but every community's had a different response in terms of permitting that process.
Alex?
I haven't heard anything. I mean, we're still going as business as usual from that standpoint. Mind you, the last few weeks it's been nothing but the SBA PPP program. So that's all we've been running. But as far as the developers that we deal with, we're still, obviously their shopping centers are at a standstill from the commercial standpoint. On the multifamily, they're finishing the projects, hoping that once this is over, they'll have the tenants. But nothing from our end has stopped.
Okay. And this question might be for Dale regarding the recovery for the state economy. I think a few moments ago we were talking about different letters, U, B, L, W, and there's a few more that I'm not thinking about right now. What's your take as to what would be the shape, or what should we expect in the outlook for the Texas economy in the near term?
I think we'll ride the general wave of how the national recovery goes. However, the only time, and we talk a lot about the Texas miracle, the only time Texas growth has lagged the nation as a whole is when oil prices are weak. So I think until we see some stability in the oil and gas sector, until we see oil prices back, probably we need them well north of $30 for a lot of Texas production to stay online and to continue. I think if oil prices come back and stabilize around $40, the Texas miracle will continue, and we'll lead the nation out of the recovery, into the recovery. If oil prices stay around $20 or less, then I think I think Texas is going to be a laggard. I think we're talking about a tougher slog in Texas than the rest of the U.S.
Yeah. So Dale, I think we can, and all of us could spend maybe another hour or so just talking about the energy markets. But luckily, that was precisely the topic of last week's webinar for the Texas Lyceum. So for any of the audience who are already posting questions on the energy market, I would strongly encourage you to go to the Texas Lyceum website and download the video. And last week's conversation was very insightful, and there's a lot of great discussion and information there. We're approaching the end of our time here together, and so let me just ask a question for everyone. And when I think about the Lyceum, I mean, this is a group of men and women who we are trying to make a difference for our state. We're leaders in different capacities, different roles, different parts of our state. How can each of us, what can we do, and how can each of us be ready and to help the state move from the crisis response to the economic recovery? How can we help our state move from the crisis response to the recovery phase? And I'll start with Linda.
Flatten the curve. Stay safe. I think that's the most important thing. If we can overcome at least and get to a stable position from people's health perspective, I think people will come back. But the uncertainty, and even with my staff, they're uncertain, they're concerned about their future, and they have a lot of uneasiness. And I think people are very uneasy right now. So the only way they're going to feel more comfortable is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to stay healthy.
Thank you, Linda. Dale?
I agree with Linda, and I wished I'd said every word of that. I mean, that's right on point. I mean, we spend a lot of time and we're focusing on the economy, but the truth is we have to be at a place from a public health perspective when we feel like we can re-engage. But that said, we've got to be ready to go 150%. The Lyceum is a great group. It's got industrial diversity. So all of us work in different niches of the economy. We've just got to be ready to make up for lost time.
Thank you, Dale. And Alex?
Well, I guess I should just concur and end it at that. But I agree. I mean, we have to obviously health, is priority. But again, at the local level, I do see, I do hope that people can go out and support their small business, their local business, because they are vital to the country. They're vital to every community. And I hate to, as I mentioned when I first answered the question, the lady that I spoke to earlier, I mean, she was in tears. This is her livelihood, and so it's nice to see the community support businesses, and I think we need them. But at the same time, obviously, we have to be mindful of the fact that we have to be safe when we go out and do it.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. Alex, Linda, Dale, James, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your expertise. It was a wonderful conversation. I hope everyone out there in the Lyceum cyberspace enjoyed our conversation and learned a few things here and there. Expect an email from the Lyceum in the coming days with the recording of today's webinar. And also we'll be distributing a few resources that we believe might be beneficial to all of you. Again, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.